it's the biggest, like, misconception, I think. Like, athletes, I can't tell you how many say they get into a job, and then they start questioning everything.
Yep.
One, it starts with their agitation, like, meaning they're sitting at the desk and they don't know how to sit in a desk. Like, they just it's so hard because they are used to moving their bodies 6 to 8 hours a day,
Right.
right? And then it's like as they've been sold this vision that if you get a job, oh, you're gonna be happy. Like, and everything, everything solves itself. That is so not the case.
Hello, and welcome back to Raising Men. Today, I'm joined by somebody who brings a rare and powerful perspective to the crisis facing boys right now. Emily Huston is a dear friend of mine whom I've known for 20 years, which blows my mind to think about. And she has spent her life inside male dominated arenas, first as a professional volleyball player, and then later as the CEO of Home Team, a community dedicated to serving elite athletes during and after their athletic career. Emily, welcome to Raising Men.
Thanks so much, Shaun. I'm elated to be here, honestly.
Now,
Yeah.
as I said, you've lived your life inside male dominated arenas. And how has that shaped your understanding of men and masculinity?
Wow. Well, you're hitting hard from the very beginning. I feel like, I mean, working in male dominated fields it's had it pros and cons. I love working with men. I think that there's just so much richness there. And obviously between men and women, there's a lot of work that we can do together. And then on the other hand, though, I've also experienced quite a bit of discrimination and
Sure.
um, abuse and um, just some awful, awful stuff. So, I feel like I really have seen it all, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that that kind of experience for a lot of women is radicalizing and it turns them maybe anti-man, but that's not the experience or that's not the result that you have.
No, no, I think for me, like in terms of the con side of my involvement with men, it's just given me more understanding of what women go through every single day. Of being a woman
Sure.
myself, I've experienced these things, but these are not exaggerations. These are real things that are happening in our culture and in our world. Like I said earlier, I think that it's really going to take men and women working together to create a healthier relationship with oneself and with, the communities and the people that we get to interact with every day.
Yeah, I think that, so the types of the experiences that you're talking about, um, tend to cultivate actually a lot of what is happening in our culture today tends to cultivate this us or them mentality, a
Yeah.
kind of zero sum game
Yeah.
mentality where it's viewed that every gain that women have in our culture is at the expense of men and vice versa. And
Right.
so you can get this attitude where you're really pitted against each other. And that's actually how the bad guys win. The bad guys are out there trying to make that happen so that they can, benefit from the demagoguing.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. But I also think we need to acknowledge history. Yeah, I think we need to acknowledge historically, what has taken place between men and women. And if anything, like we could consider perhaps repair being a part of that
Sure.
process. But historically, some women have described as if men are standing on their necks and won't let them stand up.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that. I do think that women have historically been put down and put in positions so that they're not able to thrive. But I don't think that that's always the case today. And there is more equity. Um, Not 100%. I think that there's still more work to be done for women in terms of equity, but there is also now work to be done on the male side of that equation.
Yeah. So I look at it I mean, it's my opinion that there's a masculinity crisis today, and I think, yeah, I mean, you share that opinion.
Yeah.
What, from your perspective, what is at the core of the masculinity crisis?
I you know, I think that if we look at the progress that's been made for women and girls empowerment, and we maybe this has been going on for 20, 30 years,
Mhm.
of a real emphasis on lifting up women and girls. But I think that that has been at the expense of lifting up boys and men.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think that boys and men have been left behind.
Yeah, it's that zero-sum mentality.
Yes, yeah, and I don't think that it's been intentional,
Yeah.
in my opinion. I think that it's been an outcome, but I also think that another core issue is just the development of our culture and our society. Social media certainly plays a role, obviously, and you know the world is moving faster. We also have less third places in the world,
Right.
meaning
Yeah.
places for people to come to. Maybe I'll step back on that. So, first place is like your home environment where you spend time with your family. Second place is your workplace, where
Yeah, or your
many of
school if
us,
you're younger, yeah, right.
yeah, or school, yep,
Yeah,
which is also a place where we spend most of our time, right?
yeah.
um,
Except less and less now. I mean, in work, now a lot of people are remote, and so there's less offices
True.
and those sorts of all these institutions are crumbling.
That's another component, and that,
Yeah,
that obviously ties into technology. And then the third place are places that used to be quite abundant, that are diminishing,
yeah,
and those can include like a cafe or libraries or parks. People going and sitting out in parks and meeting other people.
yeah,
But I think that there's less opportunity for people to feel connected, um,
yeah.
without technology.
I can't tell you how often I drive around and see empty parks in the city. It's crazy, and I don't know, maybe it's always been this way, and I've just never noticed. Now that I have kids, it's, "Oh, there's a park there?" But wow, I mean, there's never anybody in any park.
Yeah.
Part of it is, I guess, kids are in school and stuff like that, and I'm not necessarily driving around, but sometimes it's the middle of a day on a Saturday and the park is
Yeah.
completely empty.
Yeah. I
And
mean, so the
so
question is like, what are people doing?
yeah, yeah,
Like
well, they're inside playing video
they're
games, watching
inside.
TV, or on their phones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, what do we do about it?
Well, I mean, I don't claim to have all the answers, but
Sure. Yeah.
I in terms of what we do, I think that one, it takes just acknowledging that men and boys and really so in terms okay, so to step back again, where they're behind is I think that is has a lot to do with the relationship with themselves.
Mhm.
And um and connected to other people.
Yeah,
So, yeah, you have the relationship with yourself, right? And then you have the relationship that you have with other people in the world and in your communities. And that's where I see men and boys really struggling, is that they have a hard time identifying their own personal experience of what's going on and how to interpret whatever's happening to them.
mhm,
Um, and then it's also because of that, it's difficult for them to understand themselves. It's difficult to connect with other people. And so, the result is going inward, hanging out in the basement, hanging out, closing their bedroom door and hanging out in the bedroom, playing video games,
yeah,
addicted to their phones. And so not dating. I mean, that's another big one, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
there
not having interest in dating and not being interesting to the opposite sex, right?
Yeah.
And so there's another feedback loop
Yeah,
there.
and not working as well. I mean,
Not
I think
working.
we're seeing unprecedented levels of, young men who are not
Yeah,
working,
yeah, that's borne out in the data.
and also falling behind in education.
Mhm,
So these are all places, second places where we can go to meet people and we can engage and we can grow and we can thrive. But
yeah,
if we're stuck in our bedroom, It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, when I hear stuff like that, it feels like an opportunity to me. I mean, it's so it's an opportunity. It actually can make things easier for my son to some degree because if we surmount this problem, then he's in rarefied air, so to speak. And so I think that's I- you know I don't think that I'm going to solve any. I- I don't have any way to solve any big societal problems. I don't have a big platform. I don't. I'm not in government or anything like that. But what I can do is decide how I'm going to respond.
Mhm,
And for me, it really is about, okay, what are the tactics and what is it that I need to do to make sure that my boy can thrive in the world? And how do I keep those influences away from him and cultivate the kinds of things that are positive? And part of it is that a lot of what our modern technology is enabling in us is particularly caustic or toxic to young men.
mhm,
So, ubiquitous availability of porn. This
mhm.
is not something that a lot of women, a high percentage of women struggle with, but a high percentage of men really do.
Yeah.
Gambling, all of those things that prey upon uh, an immature prefrontal cortex are things that are going to disproportionately affect men. And so we're seeing that we've had it for 10 years. We've had social media for 10 years. And so now we're starting to see the effects of it. I think that feels like part of the cause to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think part of the solution to bring this back to your domain expertise, part of the solution is sports.
Mhm.
And I think, you were part of an elite sports program, both in college and then post college, you played professional volleyball. What and you did it at a time where, women's sports was not even as celebrated as it is now, and not that it's all that celebrated now even. I mean, it's a pathway to college still, but, even professionally, it 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 doesn't even now, but certainly back when you did it, it wasn't really the same way it is for men. What is your perspective about that? What is kind of a healthy relationship to sports and how to cultivate that in our boys?
So, I think it actually goes back to generations before. Um, the system that I grew up in and that some of my colleagues grew up in is a very militaristic type of sporting environment. Um, it's like no pain, no gain type mentality.
Sure.
It's like you do everything at the expense of yourself for your sport.
Yeah.
Um, it's you just complete sacrifice for your sport. And that's to paint a picture, that's the umbrella that we grew up in.
Yeah.
Um and we also I see in my work that there's a lot of trauma in sport as well. And you'd be really surprised how many like traumatic experiences there can be for men and women um in their sporting careers. And so, we move forward and the coaches of today are probably people like me. And but what we're seeing is a younger generation that's involved in sports, and they're growing up in a culture that's has beginning to destigmatize mental health,
Mhm.
beginning to promote the idea that you're a human over an athlete, and that that being balanced is important for yourself as a human, but also in your sporting career. And what I believe is that will these athletes that are coming up in a more holistic environment and sporting environment will become the coaches of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I have hope that um, that this next generation will carry that down, and we will see teams that are much healthier,
Mhm.
that um, don't necessarily, it's not the no pain, no gain type thing. It's about enjoying your sport, working hard as you can, and of course, it takes an incredible amount of sacrifice to be an elite athlete, but not at the expense of your well-being and not at the expense of your family and not at the expense of yourself. And so I can go into more details about like what the current sporting environment is like, but that's kind of where I think we've come from and the direction that we're moving in.
Yeah, if I look at, kind of the trends in terms of youth sports, it feels like it's gone in absolutely the opposite direction of what you're talking about. I mean, these days, if I want my son to be an elite volleyball player, then he better specialize at the age of 11, and he better get into the best clubs in our area, forget school athletics. That's not a thing anymore. It's now elite clubs. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. We're driving all over the state
Yeah.
to go to volleyball tournaments. We're flying places to go to go to volleyball tournaments, and that's what it takes in order to even have a shot at
Yep.
becoming, getting up to the next level. And that works against what you're talking about, I think. It sets the stage. Is there a pushback against that sort of thing?
No, not like at a systemic level,
Yeah,
because of what you're describing is true.
yeah,
The you have to specialize at a younger age. You have to commit at a younger age, meaning you like moving from being a high school athlete to a college athlete. It's freshmen and sophomores committing. You're talking about, a 15 or a 16-year-old talking about their future careers that are even just 4 years away.
insane.
Um, I mean,
Yeah,
it is insane, yeah. So, and to talk about volleyball, one of the I coach for fun at the club level, what you were just talking about,
mhm,
um, and it's now nearly year round.
yeah,
So they do have the high school season, but they'll after the high school season no, during the high school season now, they will the season will begin, and then it'll go all the way into the summer, and then they'll have 2 or 3 weeks off, and then they'll have tryouts
mm,
immediately.
mm,
And so it's crazy, honestly, what's happening. But it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who are promoting, human over athlete
yeah,
and trying to destigmatize mental health. That is what one of our objectives with Home Team is, that we're trying to um, fill these systemic gaps that
yeah.
are occurring, and so the athletes of today don't have to experience what the athletes of yesterday experienced.
Yeah, I would love to drill down further into that. It does seem to me that that home team is a possible antidote to this. And so how are you addressing those kinds of problems?
Yeah. So, well, one of the things is that with athlete mental health, there's still a ton of stigma. I think that from the work that I'm seeing, mental health is becoming more and more destigmatized generally.
Yeah.
But because of the pressure that athletes are under, and because of NIL too, NIL is stands for name, image, and likeness, and
Yeah.
it's a pathway that is now ubiquitous within the NCAA, and it's a pathway for athletes to make money. When I was an athlete, I wasn't able to make money off of the pictures that Baylor was using, or,
Right.
we also weren't allowed to have any sort of income outside of our scholarship.
Yeah.
And let's call a spade a spade. These athletic institutions are financial machines. I mean, it
Yeah.
is all about making money, and at the expense of athletes often.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, so with NIL and also now increased pressure with funding and all that, it's created a dynamic where athletes are even more famous.
Mhm.
They're making so much money. I can't. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I've heard.
and that comes with its own challenges. I mean, you
Oh,
have people who never made any money, at all, and then all of a sudden they've got, endorsements worth millions of dollars a year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's
Like,
not just the endorsements, it's also the institutions
the
who
institute
are
okay,
paying
yeah,
them to play.
yeah,
And the other thing that for the athletes that aren't quite at this $1,000,000 level or more,
sure.
what has become normalized within NIL is influencing. And I don't think
Mm.
I need to explain that because
No.
that's probably something we all understand today.
Yeah,
But what that means for the athlete is that they're constantly on through social media. They have, let's be real about this, like, especially for women, but men too, is you have to look good. You have to be traditionally like
attractive,
beautiful
yeah,
or hot or
yeah.
sexy, and if you're those things, like you're more likely to get deals because you're going to sell stuff, right?
Yeah, you
And
you there's also an incentive to be controversial.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally.
Mm.
Maybe tell me what you're
Well,
thinking.
it depends. So, yeah, so one of the ways to get likes on social media and get exposure and influence on all of those things is to be controversial. And there are healthy ways to be controversial and there are unhealthy ways to be controversial, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and so I mean, so I'll give you an example. So I mean, there's Riley Gaines was a college swimmer who swam against a trans athlete named Leah Thomas, and I mean, she ended up, she ended up tying for fifth place with Leah Thomas,
Mhm.
and used that to launch herself into the kind of magosphere as essentially an anti-trans activist. And I mean, I think that there is an absolutely rich conversation that can be had about the appropriateness and inappropriateness of trans athletes in sports. And frankly, I think that the NCAA will probably figure that out just fine. Um, but what I'm focused on with respect to the Riley Gaines thing is literally while she was at the University of Kentucky, her coach was found to have raped two of her teammates.
This is a male coach, I
This is a
assume?
male coach, and he literally raped two of her teammates. And so she's out there on Fox News talking about how the biggest threat to women's sports is transgender athletes, of whom there are a handful in the world.
Yeah.
And her coach was raping her teammates. And that's she got rich talking about the other thing, but nobody wants to talk about what I would think is a much bigger threat to women's sports. Are you with me?
I'm with you.
And so, I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like that's a good, healthy controversy. I mean, I also doubt that it's something that, is that people are going to be proud of 10 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that way about a lot of things, is
Yeah.
like, there's a book out there, it's called something like, so many years from now, nobody's gonna have believed that they're not gonna say that they were on that side,
Yeah.
or, like,
Yeah.
there's
No,
some.
nobody admits to being a Nazi.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sentiment, and especially with, like, we're talking about Israel and Palestine, I mean,
Mhm.
that like, I'm really curious to see where that lands with Israelis who are anti-Palestine and pro-genocide, I like,
Man, yeah, it is. Yeah. That's such
so
an interesting
yeah. I mean,
thing.
it's devastating, and, there are terrible things happening in the world, including in the sports world, as you're bringing up,
That's right.
and, that's, to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is
Mhm.
because I'm old enough now where I don't necessarily use the word legacy, but I feel like that's a word that people understand, is like, when yeah, what mark am I gonna leave on the world?
Mhm.
And I have the ability to change things. And so I want to use my position, I want to use my power, I want to use my experience to change the landscape, especially within athlete centered care. because there are so many issues. So
Yeah.
yeah, so here we are.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, if I were to paraphrase, essentially what you're trying to do is bring is be kind of a marketplace between the athletes or ex-athletes or soon to be ex-athletes and the resources that they can leverage to thrive. And that means financial help or mental health and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So maybe it might be helpful if I share part of my story
Yeah,
and
yeah, let's hear it.
what took me to today. So I was, as you said, Shaun, I played volleyball in college. I was a D1 setter at Baylor University. And I retired. And then about 3 years into my retirement, I became extremely depressed.
Mm,
I was really, really struggling, and it absolutely was attached to my retirement. I had this idea that, I was going to transition into the real life, and I was going to get married, and I was going to have kids, and I was going to have this beautiful life and all these things. And 3 years into it, like, that was not happening. I'm still not married and I still don't have kids. So this will, tells you a little
you can
bit
borrow my
about.
kids anytime you want. I will ship
I'll
them
take
to
them.
you,
They're amazing.
and they can go to Aunt Emily, and they can hang out as long as you're willing to keep
Take them. That's you can send them on over.
them.
Um, so but, like, life wasn't happening, things weren't lining up the way that I thought they would, and I was really struggling. I thought that my issues were my own issues, and I thought it was a me problem, and, um, and so, anyway, in my depressive thinking, I was just desperate to get out of, like, this headspace that I was in,
Yeah,
and I, said to myself, like, I need to do something that I'm good at and something that I enjoy. And the conclusion that my depressive mind came to was that the only thing I was good at was volleyball.
yeah,
Now, of course, that was not true. Like, of course, I've had many other strengths, but
right,
I
right.
didn't have anybody to help me. And I felt very alone. And so I just decided that, okay, I'm gonna go back to volleyball. And so that's what I did. I ended up going back and playing volleyball professionally. I will, just for storytelling purposes, this 3 year time frame is when I met you.
Yeah,
So we were playing volleyball in Dallas together, and those were good times.
that's when we
Uh,
became friends. Yeah,
yeah, that's when we became friends. And so, but what led me to play volleyball professionally was my depression. So I, you know, left the United States, went to Europe, played volleyball professionally. Um, and I played 2 seasons there and did end up retiring because of an abusive coach who
mm,
was a male.
right.
He absolutely had anger issues, which we now know typically, like, male. I'm not saying that he was depressed. I didn't have enough insight into his mental health, but male depression can, um like, the symptomology can be aggression.
Sure.
And so what was coming out in his work with us is he was fighting other coaches. He was berating us. There was another time where he got in a fist fight with a coach, and we had to call the
Wow.
police. Yeah, I mean, it was very, very bad, and so it got so bad to the point where I had a dream that he was going to physically hurt me, like, punch me, and I just was like, "I this isn't worth it." So I quit. Um, I did try to transfer, but in my position, like, it just wasn't possible. But anyway, so I
Yeah.
quit and I went back to the US, and then I went to grad school, studied counseling psychology, and then ultimately found myself working in another very male dominated field, which was private single family offices. And
Mm,
so it was there that I got a ton of world class operational experience,
yeah.
but also experienced significant issues related to men. So I'm happy to go into that if you want, but
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go into it.
okay. Well, I experienced pay discrimination twice. Once because my employer, was attracted to me and like, had a fantasy that I would be taking care of him for his entire life, basically, um, and when I asked for a raise, it confronted this fantasy that he had. So, I was
Oh,
screamed at, I was yelled at, I mean, it was like and I was this asking for a raise was held against me for months.
wow.
Um, Meanwhile, he was in therapy and eventually through his own therapy sessions, he was able to communicate with me what had happened, which is how I know how I can tell you this.
Interesting. Wow,
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
And then let's see, another family office that I worked for. I should probably clarify what a family office is. A family office is the financial arm of extremely wealthy individuals.
Sure.
And so, at scale, it's more than just financial management. It also goes into operations. And so, I manage large
Yeah.
teams like drivers and cooks and all that stuff.
Got it. Hiring and firing
So,
and all
yeah,
that.
all that. It's a
Yeah.
different world.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so then in one of the largest family offices of the world that I was working in, um, I experienced pay discrimination. Experienced sexual harassment,
Mm.
bullying. Bullying was really, really bad, by a male family member. Um,
Boy, that must be so tough to deal with because they're not quite your employer, but they are your employer, and so the protections that you might get in a normal workplace don't necessarily apply, I guess, in
no, they don't. Yeah.
situations.
Yeah,
They're
it's
almost a client.
yeah, almost. I mean, I was an employee,
Yeah.
um, but you can't fire the family.
Right.
So
Right.
so, it's a difficult world to navigate, or industry to navigate. But the sexual harassment came from my colleagues.
Oh,
So and the pay discrimination obviously came from my employer.
sure.
So, yeah. Anyway, so, but to go back to my story
Yeah.
around, like, how we got to home team, I decided to leave the family office world. After 10 years of working in that environment, again, I was like, "No, like, I'm just so done with this."
Mhm.
And it was around that time that I reconnected with a former teammate of mine, and she had written a book, called Always an Athlete, and it described the trajectory or the developmental cycles of a young athlete from the time that they start committing to play a sport, like you said 11 earlier, but it's actually like 5 to 8 years old.
Really? Wow.
Yes, it's 5 to 8 years old, and then she equated this experience as if the athlete developmentally is climbing up a mountain, and the
Mhm.
top of that mountain was retirement, and then when she got to the retirement phase, she described it as if the athlete falls off a cliff, and it just blew my mind,
Yeah,
like,
must have
well
resonated with you.
in spectacular ways,
Yeah.
like, it honestly like, it changed my life because
Yeah.
of where it brought me to today, but what I saw through the illustration of her book and this cliff effect is that, 1, like, this is what every athlete experiences,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
They
Your
retire.
your experience is universal, it turns out.
My experience is universal, and what is that experience? Your support systems evaporate. Your team, becomes fragmented. Everybody moves to different locations. You leave the institution that so much revered you, but now has quite literally discarded you. I can't tell you how many people have shared a similar type of description.
Yeah, I've never
You're
thought of it that way, what
you're
that must be
used
like,
goods. You're
but
no longer valuable because
yeah.
remember, this is a financial
Yeah, you
institution.
just got fired.
You're not making money for them
Right,
anymore.
right.
So you're no longer of value.
Mm,
And then to get back to so that's kind of like the like bigger systems that are at play. But within the athlete experience, there's a grief process. There's oftentimes a a realization that your full potential was not actualized, um, that you don't know how to make friends because you're now in the real world and your friends have always been athletes, but you don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
how
You
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 don't know how
almost
to
you
train.
you don't have to make friends as an athlete. You're just friends with your teammates.
Yeah. And when you go into the real world, you don't know where the athletes are
Yeah.
because there's so few of you, honestly. There's so few
Right.
athletes, like, they're just kinda hiding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then what everybody seems to tell the athlete is that, "Hey, go get a job," like,
Mhm.
as if that's going to solve everything.
Mhm.
And let me tell you, as, like, one of uh, there's so many services out there that are connecting athletes to employers, and it's the biggest, like, misconception, I think. Like, athletes, I can't tell you how many say they get into a job, and then they start questioning everything.
Yeah.
One, it starts with their agitation, like, meaning they're sitting at the desk and they don't know how to sit in a desk. Like, they just it's so hard because they are used to moving their bodies 6 to 8 hours a day,
Right.
right? And then it's like as they've been sold this vision that if you get a job, oh, you're gonna be happy, like, and everything, everything solves itself. That is so not the case. Like,
Mhm.
what happens with athletes is when they leave, they are actually behind their non-athlete peers.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because their non-athlete peers have spent 4 years in college having, um, applied to internships, having done the internships, have had jobs,
Yeah, they're doing worky stuff.
they're doing yeah, I mean, they're trying to enter into the real world,
Yeah.
and in order to get a job or in an internship, there's so many things that have to take place before that. But
That's
with
right.
athletes, they don't have the time, they don't have like, it's mostly a time issue, but also
Yeah.
energy issue.
Sure.
Um, anyway, so that's part of the dynamic. Your an athlete's relationship to food changes.
Mhm.
Right? An athlete goes from fueling their body to eating, and you don't really know how to eat when you're not training.
You're not expending 6 calories or 6,000 calories a day.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and then that touches on another thing is an athlete has been training nearly their entire life, right? And I use the word training very carefully because training and exercise are way two separate things,
That's
and
true.
they are on very opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so when an athlete is on their own, they don't know how to exercise,
Huh.
which sounds really weird to say because they've had professionals supporting them and their technique and improving their strength and agility and all
And
that
tell them
stuff.
what to do and when to do it and show up at this time and do these
Yeah,
drills and all that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
all that. I mean, they just don't know how to exercise for fun. Like
Mhm.
going on a walk is not exercise to an athlete,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
It's
just
it's
not.
like the difference between being in an orchestra and being a solo guitarist, I imagine.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the music world,
Yeah,
but
well, I mean, just like
but
you're part of this grand thing. You're part of this big team. You've got your sheet music laid out. You have it's very highly planned, and you're doing that same thing versus only having your own domain and your own like you've got to write your own songs and you have to do your own thing and you have to book your own gigs and you have to do all of that
right.
stuff. And those are skills. I mean, ostensibly, oh well, both of them are playing music, but but the skills that are required to be successful as a solo musician are way different than the skills that are required to be successful as part of a team.
Yeah, I mean, this actually reminds me of like you're an elite athlete, you're part of a system where a lot of support is provided to you,
Yeah,
right? Not only your scholarship, but also like you're provided student athlete housing,
sure.
right? And so, but a non-athlete peer, they have to go find their own apartment. They have to
Right.
apply to those. They have to find a way to get car insurance or, any of those things. And so
Yeah.
the non-athlete peers are, slowly developing skills that are what an adult would have.
Mhm.
And then a student athlete is just they're just so behind because quite literally all they've been doing is their sport and their studies.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. And so And so how do you bridge that gap with home team?
Yeah, so with home team, so we have an emphasis on retired and injured athlete mental health. And the reason that we focus on these areas is because this is where we see the most gaps in care. So, to touch on the injury piece real quick, when an athlete becomes injured, I really like to call it it's an injury of isolation
Mm,
because you are taken away from your team. Not intentionally, but, like, for example, when the team is practicing, you're not practicing. You're
yeah.
not even in the gym, to be honest. You're in the training room with all
Mhm.
of the other injured athletes,
Yeah.
if even that. You're no longer traveling. You might be eating with your team, but maybe not. I mean, it's just it's a really difficult time. And so during retirement and injury, this is when we see a lot of mental health issues come up.
Yeah. I can imagine.
And, the normal like, the rate of mental health issues is about 30% amongst the general population, and so we see that, not only with the athletes, but there's in fact an increase in mental health issues during those times.
Mm,
So one of the things that we're looking or that we're doing is we've created a community of retired, injured, and current athletes, along with all of the professionals that are in the athlete ecosystem. Community is a huge part of the solution. Just knowing that you're not alone,
yeah.
right? I thought it was a me problem, and
Sure.
it's just not. Like, this is a systemic level failure on all athletes. All athletes retire. All Most athletes at some point are going to become injured,
Yeah.
right? It's part of the game. And so right now there are zero resources. My friend's book that described the cliff effect,
Mhm.
no next steps, no resources for athletes to reach out to. But I
Yeah.
want to just point out that is not a critique of her. It's a
No.
crit
It's
it's a
just because it's not there. It
it's a
doesn't
critique of
exist.
the system. It's a
Yeah.
critique of the system, and there are always if you do the math, like, the maths out, like, there are always more retired athletes than there are current athletes.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, of course, right? But think of all of the people that are being failed.
Yeah.
Right? They've been, historically, they've been taken advantage of and financially taken advantage of.
Mhm.
Their bodies are taken advantage of. I can't tell you, like, all the aches and pains that I have. Like, I mean, I've met with 22-year-olds and they need, like, reconstructive surgery on their ankles.
Yeah.
What the F, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. What
so
what elite sports does to your body is very,
is
very
it's a lot. It's a
yeah, it's
big
a lot.
toll.
You're trading your
So
body for an education.
it's a lot. So community is at the foundation of where home team. One of the things that we provide to this ecosystem of athletes and the
Mhm.
professionals in it. Um, Within our community, we also have weekly programming of events. So different professionals can come in and talk about different subjects that support the athletes and the people working in the field. And then the next thing that we're building is we're calling it a service-based marketplace. If you have a better word, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Actually, I think that's a great term.
Well, it's because marketplace sounds very, like, transactional,
Yeah.
but one of the systemic failures right now is that can be very difficult for an athlete to find mental health care.
Yeah.
And also there's help-seeking behaviors. The help-seeking behaviors are which means, like, when an athlete is in need of support,
Yeah.
will they go get help or will they not? And
Ah,
oftentimes they will not. So,
yeah.
okay, why is that? One, it could be, their time is so, like, demanded of that it's hard for them to go walk all the way across their campus to the, counseling and psychological services.
Yeah.
Like,
They might not know where to go, and it's also
or
stigma.
they may not know where to go,
Yeah.
or they may not even have access to clinicians.
Mhm.
Let's see, what else? Another thing that curtails help-seeking behaviors is confidentiality.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, depending on the level of the athletic department and how much funding they have, they may now have mental health clinicians, but the athletes fear that they're in communication with the coaches. And, you know, they're fearful for their playing time, fearful for their NIL money. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many different like things that take play that can prevent it, like social media stuff,
Yeah.
right? I mean, to go back to being an influencer, if it gets out that you're having, anxiety attacks, like I don't know, who knows? Like people are always bashing them online. Like they don't need any more fuel
Yeah.
to attack them. So anyway, the marketplace that we're building centralizes the existing resources around the country in one
Mhm.
location that is for all for athletes centered care, with vetted providers who were athletes themselves, and understand what they're going through.
I love that offering. That is, I can imagine how powerful that is. It sounds like, I mean, it basically sounds like you went and built all the stuff that you wish existed when you were 22.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean it's not all built yet, but we
Sure,
are building
sure. Yeah, but
it.
that's the vision.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
like,
yeah, that's the
let's
vision.
let
It's
let's go have 22-year-old Emily Huston not suffer the way that she suffered, and make sure that the next one, has resources at her disposal to make
100%,
sure that doesn't happen.
100%. I mean, when
Yeah,
I connected with my former teammate and read her book that was just published, a
yeah,
year or 2 ago,
yeah.
um, I honestly could not believe that after 20 years of being retired, or nearly 20 years,
Mhm.
15 years maybe, that the landscape had not changed.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah,
absolutely blew my
maybe
mind.
it's even gotten worse because of NIL, because of,
It
the intense pressure that's on there, and it's actually
Yeah,
getting earlier and earlier. It's becoming that way in club sports now and those sorts of things.
it's intense out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope it gets better. I mean, I hope that you're right in your optimism that the kinds of things that these athletes need in order to thrive are coming online. And, I know that the home team is part of that. But it's going to take a lot more than that. And it's going to take a lot of awareness of parents and a lot of awareness in the community to make sure that, people don't need to sacrifice their mental health or their bodies for the 4 years they get to play volleyball in college. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. To take this back to men, I wanna point out that, 80% of deaths by suicide
Yep.
are by men,
Right.
and death by suicide amongst NCAA athletes has recently risen to the 2nd leading cause of death
Oh
amongst
gosh.
athletes. Yeah.
That's
I mean, so
a
it is
terrifying statistic. Second leading
it's
cause of death.
yeah, 2nd leading cause of death, and it just
Right.
recently came up on from the 3rd. So, to me, this is not an option. Like,
You have to do something.
we need to mobilize. We need to change things.
Yeah.
We ourselves need to change, right?
Yes.
And this is one of the reasons that I care so much about male athlete mental health, and not just athletes, but male and young boys' mental health,
Yeah.
is because of the tragedies that we're seeing. This is a loss to the world, right? I mean, it's a loss to their families, it's a loss to their friends, it's a loss to their future and their potential.
Mhm.
And, oftentimes somebody makes a decision that cannot be reversed in the matter of 20 minutes is statistically what has been found. So an example of, where we're seeing systemic gaps in terms of these like these inflection points or these transitions that athletes go through.
Mhm.
There was a young man named Marshawn Nealand who recently died by suicide. He did have mental health issues when he was, I believe it was at the University of Michigan, where he was a football player. And in fact, from what I've read, there during his 4 or 5 years that he was an athlete at the university, there were two wellness checks that were made on him because
Right.
people were concerned for his safety and well-being.
Yeah.
And so it was very well known. In fact, I think it was even the coach's that had made one of the phone calls. And so it was very well known. I think another was a teammate. So this was not, Marshawn was not struggling in silence.
Yeah.
Many do, but I mean, people obviously knew that he was not well. And so then he graduates and he transitions to the NFL. And he's a rookie, and as you just said, he had his first touchdown, and then he died by suicide. And but where was the transfer of information from the university to his NFL football team?
Yeah.
I mean, there should have been a red flag for him, that this is a young man who's needing help, and he was obviously failed. This suicide is extremely preventable.
Right.
And, um, honestly, it really just takes checking in on people. Like, that may sound like an oversimplification, but if you see somebody who's struggling,
Yeah.
asking them how they're really doing and not skirting around the issue can save a life.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what happened with, like, his transition from the university to NFL, but it absolutely could have been prevented if there was more support and more care, and also if there was likely less stigma around him seeking help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a real acute aspect of the masculinity crisis is, you know, there's this vision of masculinity or of a man as the lone wolf and the indestructible wall. And so that works against seeking help or even consciously acknowledging that you're going through something difficult.
Right.
It's like the information isn't even accessible to you
Yeah.
because of your conditioning, and that goes double for an athlete
Yes.
because especially elite athletics, a significant portion of it is pushing through the pain.
It's performance
It's
is what it
yeah,
is. I mean,
yeah,
you have to perform, right?
yeah,
And you can't be weak, I mean, I'm
yeah,
not saying they can't be weak in their personal lives. Like, and weak is such a bad word anyway. Like, because
yeah.
just because you're struggling does not mean that you're weak, by the way,
That's
you
right.
know,
Yeah,
like that. So I don't want to suggest that. But when you're performing, you are performing,
yeah.
right? You're being paid for this. I
The
mean,
stakes are very high,
the
and they
stakes are
feel high.
very, very high.
Right.
And yeah, so it's difficult to unmask, I would say, and
Yeah.
especially for men.
Yeah, I can imagine it applies to everybody, but I mean, 80% of the suicides are men.
Yeah.
That's something we gotta step in and work on.
Yeah. I'm you used the word hope earlier, and I think there is hope. I think that I know that this is the path in terms of what home team is doing. And the
Yeah,
reason it's maybe sound like overconfident or something, but the reason that I want to state that so clearly is because of the signals that we get from these athletes.
mm,
And they tell us time and again how much they appreciate what we're doing and how much this is needed. And I have a startup, and I have 9 people volunteering their time.
wow.
9 people, men and women and of different colors, to try and create change. This is how much that means to people. People don't work for free,
Yeah, they're
but
bought in. Yeah,
these people are.
yeah,
They are working for free because they understand how acutely and how critically this needs to change now, not tomorrow, today, you know?
yeah,
So, but I do want to say that in terms of hope, what I do have hope for is that we see more and more athletes getting involved in their personal journey with mental health. We see more high profile athletes speaking about their
yeah,
mental health. And I'd like to put out a call to action, especially as it relates to home team, is having athletes come and speak for the advocacy of mental health and home team, but really for everybody, for all athletes. And the people outside of the athletic world. People really revere athletes. Athletes are put on pedestals, they are seen as superhuman. And my belief is that if home team is successful, we will be able to like have this butterfly effect throughout the world.
Mhm.
Because when people see their idols and these people that they have for years put on pedestals, that they too will say, okay, I can go get help too. If they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
So that is my hope. My hope is that home team is able to successfully reach the masses and help not just athletes, but all of the people that are touched by athletes.
Yeah, I think in this work that I've been doing for this podcast, one of the real through lines in a lot of the experts that I've been speaking to and everything is about how vulnerability is an unlock. And it feels unsafe. Vulnerability does. But then once you kind of understand and embrace it and actually express it the way that your friend did when she wrote that book and talked about falling off the cliff, that was an unlock for you when you read it, and it was an unlock for her when she shared it.
Mhm.
And that goes it is the butter that butterfly effect is absolutely real.
It
And
is.
and it feels like it won't be perceived. And I remember going through this actually, it happened in a conversation that you and I had where I shared with you that I was doing this podcast, and I was almost embarrassed to share that with you. And your response buoyed me in a way that was really hard. I mean, I hadn't felt that in a long time, or it's a rare feeling for me
What is
to the response that you had when I told you that I was doing this podcast on this subject, and I was so trepidatious about sharing that information, and yet
Yeah.
you were so passionately in favor of it that it
Yeah.
it made me feel like, wow, I'm really like this is I really do need to do this, as
Yeah.
opposed to feeling, I don't know, a little bit
Instead of hiding
self-conscious about
or
it. Yeah,
having shame. And
yeah,
I think that so vulnerability takes being humble. And
yeah, yeah,
because when we're humble, like, and being vulnerable, we're asking for help, and so we have to be humble and in order to do that.
mhm,
And so that is one of the unlocks, I believe, to vulnerability is being humble. And
yeah.
and I'm so glad that you were vulnerable with me, because here we are and having this amazing
Right,
conversation,
yeah,
right? And I mean, I just think that the topic of um men and boys and masculinity today is something that just needs more attention, and people need to understand how, men and boys are suffering.
yeah,
They're really, really suffering,
yeah,
you know? And
yeah, and if your response to that is, well, they deserve it because they're part of the patriarchy, well,
yeah,
go
that's
with
not gonna
yourself
get
from
us
there.
anywhere,
Yeah, I mean, that's
And
not how
so it's
you
like
get.
because it's not the zero sum game, right?
Yeah,
And so my belief in one of I mean, I will say that I have been a part of the problem. I have been a fierce, and I still am, a fierce advocate for for women and girls,
yeah,
at the expense of men and boys, though. And that's how I've shifted, right? Is that I have had so many like assaults from men, right? Not necessarily rape, although that has happened, I will say.
mhm,
Um, but so many different varying types of assaults from men that have been perpetrated by men that if we women aren't helping them, then we like, it just continues to get worse.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing, actually. I mean, not to
Right,
make it
because
political,
it's the
but
us against them mentality. That's what it okay, fine. If you're gonna pit yourselves against each other, then it's just gonna be destructive.
yeah. I mean, we truly need each other. We need to lift each other up. Um, I mean, we're going down a dark path, and the boys, you know, it's our responsibility. We are the adults. Like, we need to create an environment for them to thrive. And you know, I think it kind of goes back to this, like, message that the athletes are receiving is you to be human. It's okay to be human. And part of the
Yeah,
human experience is having a range of emotions,
that's right.
which suck. It
Yeah,
sucks,
yeah,
to be
yeah,
depressed. It sucks to be anxious. It sucks to be uncertain, all these things, but all of these things are totally normal
and it's
and
universal. Everybody feels that way,
universal.
and
Yeah.
help in sharing that is it's invigorating, actually.
Yeah. So I
Right.
really appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank
Well,
you
thank you so
for,
much. I
yeah.
like to, finish up these conversations by asking everybody more or less the same question, so I'll put you on the spot.
Okay.
Um, if there's one principle, kind of an operating principle that you think is a good operating principle to live by, what would it be?
I think modeling is important. Um, Modeling what it's like to be vulnerable, modeling what it's like to be frustrated, modeling all of the different range of emotions and sharing that with your child.
Yeah,
Um, like, for example, you get cut off by somebody, right? And instead of like screaming or whatever it is, like, you know,
yeah.
and your child's in the back seat, right? Be like, "Oh, man, like, I am really frustrated right now,"
Yeah.
and, somebody just cut
Yeah,
me
and
off.
actually, maybe screaming is part of that, but you're not
Maybe scream,
screaming in
yeah,
an ineffectual way at this other person about
yeah.
what a jerk they are. You're screaming at, "Gosh, man, I'm feeling really, really mad right now."
I am feeling really, really frustrated. Like,
Mhm.
I can't believe, you know, like, I got cut off, and I am just so upset right now. Like, but I think we need to model more of these behaviors and,
Yeah,
model more of these emotions and
absolutely.
model how we handle our emotions, right? It's okay to be sad. Like, we need to show our children that we are sad because we are human. Right? Like, we need to show them that we're human, and I think that that goes such a long way.
Yeah,
Um, and then to the men specifically, I would say give yourself grace and, and, use the word kindness, but I do believe in the power of, um, being kind to oneself, because if we can be kind to ourselves, then we can be kind to other people.
yeah,
And I'll leave you with this. One of my favorite quotes it's a Buddhist quote, and it says, um, "Peace in oneself, peace in the world."
yeah. I think that's a beautiful place to end it. Emily, thank you so much for bringing your vulnerability and your perspective to this conversation. I'm so excited for what you are doing with Home Team, and I just know that it's going to knock the ball out of the park, to use a
Thank
sports metaphor. Emily Huston is the CEO and founder of Home Team. You can visit her work at hometeamgo.com. The link is in the show notes. And remember, you are a great parent. Raising Men is produced by Fiel Hernandez. This episode was edited by Ralph Tolentino.